This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. We're really delighted to get to speak with Mary Dearborn, who is the author of 8 books, most recently Carson McCullers' A Life, which received wonderful reviews this past year when it came out. She received her PhD in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia, and she was a fellow at the Dorothy and Louis B. Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library. So, Mary, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how and why you figured out you wanted to write biography.
Well, it goes way back. And basically, I had done my doctorate in English, okay, or American Studies, and I've been very lucky, and I was able to publish what was my dissertation with Oxford. And it was a kind of funny circumstance. There was a bit of a turf war between a couple of Oxford editors, and one of them wanted to be get the American Studies titles. He grabbed my book. My sponsor had, made them aware of it. And they accepted it without really revision. So
Wow.
very quickly was able to publish that. And that really made all the difference, because once in publishing or if you've shown that you can write something full length, and often I think it works if you've written a dissertation, but obviously if you've managed to publish it, you have just immediate credibility. And looking back on it, I see too, they really wanted to get young writers, I wasn't that young, but at the beginning of my career. And there was a bit of, because of a weird combination, I got involved with an agent who kind of specialized in academics who wanted to write for a broader audience. And she did like books about the New York intellectuals, or a friend of mine that I got to her through was writing a social history of venereal disease. It was for history of science, but it was, it was uh, mainstream, and she liked things like that. And it's kind of a long story, but I was talking to her one day. And I had expressed an interest in in fact, an ethnic woman writer, Jewish writer, who had been one of the people I looked at in my dissertation, with the impossible name that you will know, of Anzia Yezierska.
Yeah.
And she said, "Oh, do you want to write a biography of her? I could do that." And yes, that sounds really great. I didn't think there would be any audience for such a thing. And I got involved with an editor who convinced me to write this sort of joint biography about her and a philosopher with whom she had had a very interesting affair. And it was heavily researched. It was a great sort of transitional book. I don't know that anyone reads it now. I kind of am fond of it. It's called Love in the Promised Land, but um, it uh, and I alternated chapters for each one, and I thought it was a pretty good story. And so it was kind of a joint biography, and then it was kind of off to the races. The editor I had at the Free Press, who talked me into doing that, which was I loved doing that book. He said, "Well, you need to write," and he suggested the subject of Henry Miller to me. And this came out of left field. I know, but I'm a big reader. And I immediately said, "Hey, I'll go," and I really took to it. I really loved Miller's works. I looked at his life, and I just said, wow, this is an unbelievable life. There hadn't been one done. And my agent took me in hand. I'm sorry,
No, go
but
ahead.
she took me in hand and said, okay, we're going to sell this. And I want you to write a proposal. And basically, she taught me the really important lesson that writing my proposal took 9 months. I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it's really, really worth it. And I now know how to do a proposal like nobody's business. And it ended up being really good, and we got a lot of bids, and it was auctioned and so forth. And that kind of got me going. But getting back to biography literature, I can tell you what I feel now. I see so many, it's like a natural thing for me. But then it was kind of a way to get at I wanted to reach a broader audience. I was leaving academics. I didn't like it. I hated the politics. I and it was a I wanted to reach a broader audience. Looking back, that sounds sort of noble, but I really didn't think it was right to write for only other academics, only for me. For
Mhm.
some people that, it's terrific, but it just, looking back on it, it seems obvious. And so that was the first of many of several biographies.
I don't know if you can remember this because it's already been a while, but figuring out how to write in that more popular style after your dissertation, was that something that you felt like your agent really helped pull out of you, or did you feel like that was already the way you were wanting to write?
Well, she did in that she made me write, rewrite and rewrite and rewrite this. But I have to confess, my a boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was a journalist, and he would go over my paragraphs of this damn proposal. And I can't remember that much of it, except that, excuse me, everybody knows this now, but don't use the passive voice.
Mhm.
Well, it's you do it in academics,
Mhm.
mistakes were made. I mean, it just,
Mhm.
you have to get it more lively.
Yeah, what you mentioned about the proposal taking a while, where we still hear this from other writers that we've spoken to who are trying trade press, and that proposal that they work on with the agent to be then shown to the editor really sounds like a hard genre to master. It sounds like you did end up feeling like you got the hang of it. What anything specifics you can share with us?
Yeah, there is, because I do the same way all the time. And what happens is that my proposal basically becomes my introduction in the
Mm.
book with
Mm-hmm.
but what it is, is you find something in the person's life that really shows them. The best example I can think of is with Norman Mailer. He had this 50th birthday party at the Four Seasons. It was a huge, huge thing. He spent all kinds of money on it, and he made an absolute. It was. He wanted to announce a grand plan. He had to investigate the press and all this, and he made an absolute ass of himself. In a kind, it was a kind of massive misfire.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, but it didn't land, and it just was. I don't know quite. I can't quite put my finger on how you find those. Somebody said to me jokingly when I was starting, I guess I might have been talking about the Mailer book, and said, look at how Albert Goldman's notoriously bad biography of Elvis Presley starts. It starts with him on the toilet. And their point was more, well, that does kind of sum him up. I mean, it says something about him, but I think it was like that was more in the idea of, find something that really grabs the
Mm-hmm.
reader.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll usually work for a proposal because you're trying to grab that
Mm-hmm.
reader too. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't recommend setting out to have it be your introduction, but it's strangely enough the way that I do them, they tend to work that way.
So I'm wondering how you have chosen your subjects of biography.
Well, it's a good question because I'm choosing one now. It's 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 really hard, and sometimes it's just I just stumble on them. Carson McCullers, I was just very lucky. I saw her name and I said, "Oh my God, there hasn't been one for 25 years." And but the having to balance the market, okay? I do reject things that I don't think are commercial enough.
Hmm.
There's something that I want to do a lot right now. And I used to always say, in the future, I can write about whoever I want. And with this book, I'm kind of saying, well, why not? Because I don't have dreams of fame or fortune anymore. So I can do a bit more of what I want. But even so, I want people to read it,
Hmm.
and this is pretty selfish or vain, but like when I talk about it, I want people to be interested.
Hmm. Hmm.
If it's somebody they haven't, an obscure poet, say, I'm
Hmm.
thinking of the ones um, it's just, and it's usually it can be hard to get editors going on. That said, all of my subjects, not all of them, but say Henry Miller, Norman Mailer, Hemingway, publishing loves those writers because Henry Miller censorship wrote four-letter words. Norman Mailer, well, he's one of them. They went drinking with him, whatever, and Hemingway, well, they bowed down. It's
Hmm.
a I've been lucky that way,
Hmm.
and but in general, I think you find that a lot if you're coming out of literature.
Hmm.
I'm sure that history, it's the same. I'm just
Hmm.
not off the top of my head thinking of analogies, but it's really tough, and but it's also got to be something that then you just run down. There have to be archives. There has to be either an estate that's a whole other
Right.
subject, or um, archives are very important. Though with Norman Mailer at the time, he didn't have any.
Hmm.
He And what I did for that, it was amazing. I went and looked up every goddamn, back then they had Reader's Guide. You'd look up every and magazine article about him. So he'd do a book tour, and the Salt Lake City Times would quote him saying, well, when I was a teenager, I slept with so and so or
Hmm.
whatever. So I was able to, and that was kind of fun, just it was different.
Hmm.
But generally, you really want archives, and I don't know what we're going to do now when nobody's writing letters, and
Right.
letters are the really important things that manuscripts somewhat, but
Yeah.
so you have to juggle all those things.
I guess it's one of your books, the Louise Bryant biography, sort of stood out as the maybe the lesser known figure. Did that teach you something, or did you walk away from that feeling I want to otherwise do sort of more better known figures?
Hmm. No, because it took me a really long time to come up with that. And before I came up with that idea, I had kind of a misfire. I wanted to write seems odd in retrospect, but I loved it then, a biography of James Fenimore Cooper.
Mm.
And I did a proposal, and I, bought a set of Cooper, and I was just crazy about it. And my agent couldn't get hardly any money for it.
Hmm.
And I took that then and it was big come down after Henry Miller. It was a big, and I took that as, maybe this isn't a good move. So I went back to the drawing board, and I found Louise Bryant, who is better known as, John Reed's. She's it, the movie Reds. She's a Diane Keaton character,
Hmm.
but she's a really. I mean, I'm not going to sell her right now, but she was great to work on. But yeah, then as it turned out, I got the same amount of money as I would have got for Cooper.
Huh.
But by then I was like, I really want to do this. And in between these very male writers, Miller, Hemingway, Mailer, I've been writing about women, and with the exception of McCullers, it's a way to get away from the
Right.
testosterone. But often they're women subjects, they tend to get effaced.
Hmm. Hmm.
Another one that I did was Peggy Guggenheim,
Hmm.
who's pretty big, but people don't take her
Hmm.
seriously
Right.
always. And Louise Bryant was just a face. There were people, Emma Goldman really hated her, and Emma
Hmm.
Goldman was more famous and all, and Louise Bryant, unfortunate life and so forth. But what I've learned over time is that you can try and try, and afterwards they tend to subside back into there's a big resistance. I
Hmm.
mean, I've found more, I guess that's women subjects. It's harder for them to make a mark. I
Hmm.
mean, there are exceptions. Carson McCullers was good that way, and often if, like with Hemingway, my point in a nutshell was that all this macho stuff is really beside the point, and there's something else
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
And, let's and then, so I really thought, in fact, I think that's an excellent book. I did it. I did all that, proved all that, and boom, that's still how people see it. You
Hmm.
know, the you can only do so much.
Yeah. With the,
But
sorry, go ahead.
no, that's probably not a great thing to tell people who are excited about what's ahead of them. But it's a bit of an uphill,
Hmm.
especially with women subjects.
Yeah. I'm thinking with your most recent, the Carson McCullers biography, since there had been biographies in the past, although as you mentioned, it's been a while, how are you able to convince the agent or editor that there's a reason to do a new one or now is the time?
They hear what they want to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, with Hemingway, the thing was, and this wasn't technically true, but whatever, it was really the first biography by a woman.
Mm.
And I wasn't that comfortable with that for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of reasons. It's sort of essentialist.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of, but okay, if
Yeah.
that's how they want to. And then with McCullers, first of all, it was 75 years. I mean, it was
Mm-hmm.
1975 was the last one. That's a nice round
Mm-hmm.
number. And there's more archives.
Mm.
They, they, there was a great archive situation, and what there were was more archives, more material. It was stuff people hadn't heard of, but they turned it into like big new archives with revelations,
Mm-hmm.
and they are, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's sort of up to your publisher to market like crazy. But they're looking for it in what you say.
Yeah.
And if you can, give it to them. I mean, that's a problem now. Something I want to do is the person has been done over and over. There's nothing really new out there. What I have to say is really new,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to convince somebody of that, and it's just me. It's not new findings or
Mm-hmm.
new, people who are talking after all these years. So it's that's kind of tricky.
Yeah, I mean, the perspective you were able to bring now to her gender identity, sexual fluidity, even
Yes.
I thought
Yeah.
the attention you paid to the drinking going on. I mean, if someone was writing about McCullers in the 70s, I just imagine that even then they might have not seen it the same way we would today. Um,
Well, and they tended to, lesbianism was something to sort of not know what to do with.
right.
And I mean, that's totally changed. And it was such a fundamental part of her, and it was complicated, it wasn't, and yeah, and unfortunately, right, when the more, I mean, things like Well, she's like so many American other American writers. She was an alcoholic, and it got pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
And um, that happens when you look closely at writers a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't know why, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and the fact of her confidence, and even her parents' treatment of her, their willingness to see her specialness at that time. This girl growing up in the South, that seemed pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I think so too. I like that. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
This little town in Georgia, and she writes this really deeply weird book when she's 23
Right.
with people all over the map. I mean, that's why you do it. It's so much fun to figure out, or to not, you can't really figure that out. You just try to show it.
Right. Yeah. For writers or listeners who are thinking about more of that other kind of project you mentioned, the recovery, the sort of not as well known name, do you have advice for this challenge of trying to write a biography of someone who doesn't really have as much name recognition?
I mean, I go for it. I was in a little biography group just locally up here in Massachusetts, and we called them the In Search of Corvo books
Hmm.
because it's actually an existing book that I read once. It's called In Search of Corvo, and it's about an elusive subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes in that case, the search for the person can become as interesting and as, you can introduce yourself in it. It's tricky. I mean, I think anyone who tries to do this knows the pitfalls. And a friend wrote about a Russian artist who lived this incredible life. And every time I recommend her book to someone, I have to explain who the artist
Right.
is. I mean, it does, and sometimes they really take. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of examples off the top of my head. They're famous ones. I mean, there are ones who are hiding in plain sight, like Zelda Fitzgerald,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also just I can't, sorry, off the top of my head, but so it's again, that's tricky, but and I find that so rewarding too. And those are the books that I used to say, oh, someday I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned your biography group, and that made me think I was going to ask you, since you haven't been in the academic setting, I wondered how you found a community of writers, if you find that necessary. Not all writers do, but who reads your work or provides feedback and support.
If you're a biography person and in New York City, and now it doesn't matter. Like I was in a biography seminar, which was called the NYU biography seminar, though it has nothing to do with it, except they meet there
Mm-hmm.
often. And I just developed a network and there's a professional organization, bio, and
Mm.
they
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I see them on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
and all of that, but it's very important to me. It's really important, and because nobody, just like the even the technical issues are nuts and bolts. Like you and I could, you could explain to me just this problem with this year and your subject's life and what do you do when there's
Mm-hmm.
it's just. But and also when you're like picking a subject, some biographers don't want to let people know that they don't
Ah,
know what to say
right.
next. But it's a little bit of a. But and then this local group, that was just fantastic. We were coming from. I don't even know how we found each other, but we read each other's work, and these are small towns up here. I don't know how we found each other, but that was really important to know people locally. But
Mm-hmm.
the the stuff in New York, and there's a Women Writing Women
Mm.
Lives seminar,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just there are problems with them, and people are very critical of them, but I just find it essential. And I don't know if your seminar that when I was at the Coleman
Mm,
Center
hmm
in New York Public Library, I mean, there were several other biographers, and it was invaluable.
mm.
And of course, what I find most interesting is I've just developed all this thinking about biography itself over the years that I find endlessly
Yeah,
fascinating. And I bore people with it, but no, I don't, I think it's really interesting.
yeah.
Because yeah.
I know we have several listeners who are working on biographies, so this will be interesting to them, and others who are wondering about it. But since you mentioned technical issues, I noticed how in um, the Carson McCullers biography, you handled that issue of um, when her fiction is kind of rooted in a part of her life. You're talking about her growing up years, and then you did a really nice job of then mentioning the fiction or the what she wrote years ahead, even in the chronological section of her
Oh,
growing up. So I wonder if that's something is that your usual way of handling that, or um
that I just think, you know, it's kind of finessing it a little better.
uh-huh.
I don't, you know, and you get better, and I can see the arc of her life a little better,
Hmm.
a little earlier than when I kind of, I mean, you stumble through. I don't, you really do,
Yeah.
but you get better at it.
Right.
So you're not quite so, you don't feel like quite so much like you're in the dark, or you can say, oh, down the road, she's going to do a lot. She's going to write about um, race relations,
Hmm.
in her last book. And
Hmm.
so let's watch for that now, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. I don't know if that's what you mean, but
Hmm.
it's definitely becomes easier to do something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of your writing practice of biography, are you able to see how you have improved it or things you've learned along the way?
I love the process, and I still work on paper,
Hmm.
and I have a filing system that works for me. And I have subjects like, say, Carson and race, but then I have year files, 1943, where I put the letters, and I try to cross-reference. And it I don't know, I've just kind of accepted that I work on paper, and I wish I didn't. And for one thing, the bird does more damage than, but yeah, I have systems now, and I have charts of decades on the wall, with each,
Mm. Hmm.
and that works for me. I don't find myself and other biographers talking about it that much. So once at the bio group at one of their conventions, I was going to be on a panel about working on paper, but I think we decided that there wasn't that much appeal. I mean, very few people were doing that still.
Yeah.
Um, but nuts and bolts are really fun to talk about, and they're good books. That talk about that stuff that I just enjoy so much. One of my favorite ones is by Meryl Seacrest, and the title, which every biographer will understand, is "Shoot the Widow,"
Mm.
because that's the thing you do first when you begin a
Hmm.
biography is you shoot the widow, because you don't want an estate that's going to be causing you trouble.
Hmm.
It's a joke,
Yeah.
but anyway, those are really, and she's a great biographer, and it's just fun to hear the stories of how people did these things.
Yeah. Speaking of method, I loved how you opened this Carson McCullers biography with this moment, I guess it was 1940, when it seemed like everything was about to change for her. What were you thinking there in terms of why this would grab the reader?
Well, for one, yeah, I started with the publication of her first book,
Mm-hmm.
and she's 23. I mean, you just heard me go on about that, but I really find that remarkable. So I wanted to take her in that year when everything's about to break for her. It's such a good book. It's not like it was hype debut novel or anything. I mean, it was hype, but it was because it was so good.
Yeah.
It was, and her life was just be starting.
Mm-hmm.
That's different, say, from Norman Mailer's 50th birthday. And she's just figuring stuff out. She was still married, and uh, she'd been in love with a woman and she was about to fall in love with a woman, but she was kind of all over the place. And so, kind of on every level, that was a cool moment in her life. And yeah, it was kind of dramatic. So,
Yeah, it worked really well. I wonder, in the over the decades of your writing, so much has changed around publicity of books and authors. I'm wondering if you have felt the need to learn new ways of promoting yourself or just putting yourself out there in different ways.
yeah, I think I just, if you could hear an eye roll probably,
Right.
'cause I really, I've had to do that. And when it comes to promoting a book, always I've said, hey, I didn't sign on for this. I wanted to write the book. I didn't know that I was going to have to do all this. And I'm not great at speaking in public, but yeah, it's changed a lot. And I've had like a Facebook page for my, not Carson, but the Hemingway. That seemed important. I don't think it did anything. A lot more, and things have changed, of course, because of COVID, and it feels like a lot of promotion I do from my desk,
Hmm.
you know, a lot of Zoom talk stuff that I do feel comfortable with, like talking to libraries and things that just, but social media, I don't do enough. I don't, and I've never quite, but I try,
Mm.
and I signed up. I like the novelist Elizabeth Strout a lot.
I'm a huge fan too.
Yeah. And so she came up on my Facebook thing and, looking for friends or whatever when her
Right.
last book came out. And I
Mm,
said, oh, what the hell? I
mm,
like her so much. And for a while, she's good at promoting herself, but she wasn't totally comfortable with it. So it was fun to sort of watch. And so she'd announce where she was speaking,
mm,
or she doesn't have to do stuff like quote reviews. You have to do that. I really don't like doing that.
mm-hmm.
You really have to, I mean, people younger than me really get this, but you have to blow your own horn.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because don't you ever wonder about the backlash? Like people feeling, oh, that's pretty obnoxious. I don't know how it feels to you.
It does. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and I think, oh my God, it's such overkill. I'm watching someone now. I can't, and I'm like, yeah, 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 great. So you got another, and or mentions or end of year lists. Well, if
Mm-hmm.
you can't get on the
Mm-hmm.
list for the last year, then anyway, but yeah, put them all up there.
Mm-hmm.
It's but you kind of have to do it.
Speaking of that change, I did want to ask you, since you have this decades long perspective now, if you feel there are things that have gotten better for biographers or anything about publishing for nonfiction writers. You're not
I think
feeling
it
it.
gets
Uh-huh.
worse and worse.
Hmm.
Literary biographies are really in the toilet,
Mm.
though publishing doesn't really know that yet. But I also worked with my editor for my last book was a Knopf, and they had a buyout of all editors over 60, and she
Hmm.
was
Wow.
well over 60. And sorry, but that's a whole different, that gives the publishing house a whole different feel. And
Mm.
maybe it's good, but they're losing all this, experience and
Mm-hmm.
talent that, those people have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know quite what they're getting in exchange, except they quoted some younger editors saying, well, no, now, we don't want someone who can take an author to lunch. We want somebody who knows about metrics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I mean, down that path is, when they figure out that you could write biographies with AI,
Hmm.
because I'm not, I hate speculating about that because it's kind of gives the phenomenon too much air
Yeah.
airspace, but it's really a possibility, you
Hmm.
know, if people don't read as much. But publishing keeps going. I mean, they
Yeah.
I don't know if I were starting out now, uh, it would be hard. You'd have to
Hmm.
do it a lot more on faith and on realizing that there's much less money in it.
Hmm.
You know, you really, I mean, I did a lot of scholarly editing along the way, freelance,
Hmm.
and I love doing that. And sometimes I really needed to, sometimes, you know, I didn't. And but it's really good to be aware of that. The advances are getting smaller and smaller. And one of the things that never changes, and I always tell my agent, when I sign a new contract, you negotiate this. The author always has to pay for the photographs, and it's
Hmm.
a lot of money. So, like, you know, you want to use a Getty photo,
Hmm.
you know, it's $750,
Yeah.
you know, and there's like 48 photos or
Hmm.
something. And that's coming from the starving,
Wow.
you know,
Yeah.
it's unbelievably weird.
Hmm.
And he said every time they won't do it. They're
Hmm.
very aware of this and they won't do it.
Hmm.
The only thing you can do is once they tried to get me to they wanted me to pay a lot for a photo that was going to be on the cover.
Hmm.
And my agent said, no, no, that's marketing. That's
Hmm.
your expense. That's not the author's expense.
Hmm.
So but I mean, that's emblematic of something, I think. You know, it's just kind of, but that's probably, you know all this about big business and publishing now. They've got such a bottom line they have to watch. And, they, most of your editor would like the publisher to pay for your photos too, but it just is not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the publicity department of a press is that an area where you see improvement or more activity than there used to be?
I'm not sure because I got to Knopf and they have the world's best.
Mm.
And I felt like I'd never had a proper promotion before, and they're just really, really good, and they really are out there, and they really are sharp, and they read their books, and they love the books. I'm there a lot for that,
Mhm.
and so I can't really tell.
Mhm.
I think in general, people in publicity tend to be very young,
Mhm.
and often not that
Mhm.
experienced, and that's not true at Knopf. They people at Knopf tend to get there and then they stay there and they, get older in the job. But it's really dicey. And actually, I don't know how you can find out about it when you're choosing a publisher, if you're choosing, have the
Mhm.
luxury of choosing, but it's important. And
Mhm.
I don't know how much you can find out ahead of time, but
Yeah, I mean,
it's real, real key.
we've been speaking to some writers who talk about hiring their own
Yes.
publicists. I don't know if that's something that you have felt could be
I've
helpful. Mm.
considered it, and
Yeah.
I know people have who swear by it.
Mhm.
And that's sort of when you get, since you can't really find out before that much, you might just say, well, and you can hire them for a month,
Right.
you
Right.
and it can be a lot of money, but I know somebody who was just she never used the publicity department at a publisher again,
Hmm.
but she has really great publicists and
Mhm.
people, you find one and they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
They love to go out there and get you on, I don't know, something you never thought of, like a TV this or that,
Mhm.
or they do really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And
There.
that makes the publicity part more fun or less distasteful.
Mhm. Mhm. There's two questions that we've been asking all guests, and one is whether there's something you wish you had known about writing or publishing earlier in your career.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, I think that, it's really hard. We writers have complexes and they're out there working alone and all this stuff. But it's important to remember that they really, publishers are looking for writers and they really value writers, good writers. That sounds like contradicting everything that I've said. No, but they really are. It's often useful to think of them as your friends that way.
Hmm.
They want you and they need you just as much as, I mean, it's kind of cool to imagine somebody taking your project and going to their board and saying, oh, it's this great idea. I really want to do this book, and she can really do it. In other words, um, though everything in the process seems designed to make you feel inferior, like you're toiling away
Hmm.
in garret with grubby hands, they're they welcome you. And also that, I mean, I don't think I knew how much I'd love it. I
Hmm.
just it's I feel I'm very lucky.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I did you don't it seems like a big scary morass of business in front of you when you start, but it's very human.
Hmm. Do you mean, are you thinking of interactions with your editor or with readers?
Yeah, I meant more my editor and stuff,
Mm.
but the readers is real, I can't tell you how rewarding that is. And
Mm.
I find myself writing back saying a standard line I use is so, you've made my day. I feel like I'm writing into the void half the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really fun. You really connect.
Mm-hmm.
And also reviews where the reviewer seemed to get whether or not it was positive or negative, whether they got what you were saying, whether they read the book that you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so amazing when they do.
Mm.
I mean, that's worth all of it.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's not so depressing. It's,
Right.
it's very exciting,
Mm.
actually.
Well, I mean, it's very clear that you've written so many, so it really seems you love it. It must be fun for you.
I love research. I love being in the archives. I love, inter researching on the internet and researching in books. But I happen to also really, I don't know that yeah, I really love writing. I like it when it comes time to write, and it's hard as hell, and I just feel like I got to keep my head down and do it every day. But that's sort of what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
I like the research better, but I really like them both.
On the topic of writing, the other question we ask folks is if there's a writing practice or habit that is working for you.
I thought about that, and I have a bunch of tricks now. But when I started with Henry Miller and with Norman Mailer, and I remember being in a writing group at the time, and I suggested that we all do this: is take a little piece and write it up. So, like with Henry Miller, I knew that in the 60s, a movie was made of Tropic of Cancer in Europe. And I knew I was going to have to write about it. So I went and interviewed the person, the director, and I wrote it up. So that didn't come in the beginning of the Miller biography. It was a later piece. But with Norman Mailer, it was that his father had immigrated to South Africa from Russia, which is a pattern that you see a bit, but it's unusual. So I wrote about that, and it's just back then when these big projects, and I was kind of stumbling about if I had something on written down,
Mm-hmm.
or a just a tiny piece of it done. And anyway, so that helped me with those two books. And I kind of do some, I don't always write chronologically, though
Mm-hmm.
almost always, but some bits get written first or early on, and there's no question, but that takes a little bit of your, this, I don't know, the middle of the night heebie-jeebies off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's such just a little trick. I also like the Hemingway thing of when you're writing, stop when you know what you're going to say
Mm,
next, so that when you sit down the next day, it's not overwhelming. And
mm-hmm,
that's just a trick of the trade that I think really works.
mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Mary. This was really fun and interesting. And I know our listeners will appreciate it.
Good. I really enjoy it. I love talking about it. I love what I do. And, you
Yeah,
know,
it's really clear.
everybody has a book in them. And I really believe that.
Mm-hmm,
And often if we're coming out of academics, you have several,
mm-hmm.
and just go for it.
Yeah. Did you ever think about fiction or other genres?
Did before, but I went to graduate school in English. I love to read, so I
Mm-hmm,
said, and it ended up, you spend your 20s reading. I mean, it was I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it was actually I was 30 when my Oxford book came out,
mm-hmm,
and basically when I got started, I don't think I would have been ready before, but I couldn't write dialogue very well, and I just didn't. I wrote short stories, but then and as I said, I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know there was such a thing as
mm-hmm.
it's kind of a kids. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, it worked out well. Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.